Well, friends, welcome to Investment Immigration Conversations. As always, I'm your host, Carolyn Lee, principal and founder of Carolyn Lee Pllc, a U.S. investment immigration law firm dedicated to helping clients build their futures with investment immigration. Wow. Well, I could not be more pleased to have with me today two good friends and just phenomenal people to hear from. So we're in a series, we're doing a series right now. We're talking about managing, operating regional centers under the RIA, EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022. And indeed, regional centers, it's almost synonymous with CanAm. And so who better to have on with us than two important people from CanAm, Christine Chen, COO of CanAm Enterprises, and Peter Calabrese, who is CEO of CanAm Investor Services. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Oh my gosh.
Always a pleasure.
And we're just going to talk. We're just going to talk about EB-5, then, future, now. And it's a great time to do that. Of course, we have this gigantic new law. It's the end of the year. It's kind of a great time for us to talk about this, and it's going to be impromptu, really consistent with our format. We're not rehearsed. It is, wait for it, CanAm uncanned. Just waiting for it. So I'm blushing now. All right. So let's just do it. So, pre-RIA, is there anything to miss about? Is there anything to feel nostalgic about? I mean, surely we've all had some good times, good things happening under the old. What were some of those? What are you going to miss?
Well, I think that there were definitely times. I mean, we've been doing EB-5 for so long. I'm trying to think about which period of time we should look at. But there's been a lot of ups and downs with the program. There were certainly times when all the TA gerrymandering conversation aside, I think some really worthwhile deals that were in urban areas got done. They're really important for economic development. I think it's really challenging. I do understand the rationale for tightening that definition, and it certainly addresses some of the concerns out there, but it does leave certain deals out that probably, could really spur some serious economic development in some needy areys.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking PIDC Navy Yard. I mean, fabulous project. Yeah, and now we could still do those deals under the RIA, right?
Okay. Yes. So I mean, PIDC and the Navy Yard in particular is a perfect example. It's a 1,000-acre campus, former U.S. Naval Base repair station, complete with docks and everything. But it's always been a little bit tricky year to year, even though it seems like an obvious place to put in EB-5 capital and everything else. And we have put in a good $600 million and change in there over the course of a dozen deals. It's been challenging every year because nobody lives there. It's an industrial complex. It's a huge industrial complex. So you'd think that would be a single track TA, but it's not.
Right. No, because there's no one there. Yeah.
So
actually 100% employment.
So, there's like little things that, again, in the big picture, I think that the RIA brings the program to the standard it should have been at. That certainly was the goal. I think that if we are able to have a dialogue with USCIS about how best to execute that, implement that, I think the majority of stakeholders in EB-5 want to do it the right way because we're looking for longevity of the program. But there was certain opportunities with the program being what it was when there was a lot of interpretation and pushing. A lot of it was through adjudication, but I think some really worthwhile deals that wouldn't be approved now. I think they had really positive impacts on the program back then. So Not
Yeah.
all of them, but
I
definitely.
feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say, what I would say clients might miss from the previous version is the investment level.
Yeah.
There
Right.
there is the change, which is the reality of change. And look, it's also just the reality of economics. So the price of something shouldn't stay the same from, for 30 some odd years. Like there is, inflation is all anyone wants to talk about in anything, but like there are real inflationary reasons that is a totally valid rationale for it to go forward. And it's funny because like a lot of the things that you might miss about the old part of the program are all the reasons why the new program was needed. Like a lot of these were all the reasons for the new program were caused by some of the quality parts about the program back in the past. Because look, where the program really took off was like 2008, 2007. We're talking about real difficult economic times, real difficult spots for the need for financing for a lot of people. And the program filled a great need. That was like the ideal version of it,
Right.
bringing the best of the immigration world in together to invest in these projects, providing financing and bringing jobs to people. But as more and more people came in, people started to try to skirt the rules. People tried to play in the gray areas of things, and like those things just kind of compounded over years. Not like anything was wholly terrible that people were doing, but just like a little bit, you tweak it a little, and now all of a sudden, the program, what you wanted it to be and what it is meant to be, has had enough tweaks that it's now turned on its axis a little bit too much. And a reset, and the need for real integrity and a little bit more oversight was warranted. It was definitely needed. So I think that there was the program has always been great. It's always been a great avenue for real permanent immigration and a great economic benefit to the country. But all those little tweaks are what made the RIA kind of necessary.
Yeah, it does, from my perspective, feel that way too. To your point, Christine, I think there were some amazing projects and some real economic development that EB-5 enabled. And this is your point too, Pete, that I think did not get its fair share of the press and the coverage and part of the conversation. But it does also feel like the RIA is a natural part of the progression of the program. We kind of needed these adjustments, and now they're here. Pete, I want to kind of turn back to what you said about the investment threshold. We get it. It's definitely an adjustment that brings the investment threshold up to where arguably it should be, given how long the program has been around. Are there lost opportunities? So for sure, fewer families are going to qualify. What is that? Tell me about what you think from like the perspective of, well, what about, is it from a policy standpoint? So those families are excluded. Do you have any thoughts about that? And then also from a more sort of brass tacks business perspective, what does the market look like to you? How is the worldwide demand for EB-5 for U.S. permanent residency affected by the new investment threshold?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
Yes, there are.
So we have 1 hour. Am I taking the rest of this?
For you, we'll go over.
But there's definitely a segment of the population that will this makes it that much more difficult for, whether it's just from purely having that much funding available, right? Whether it's because of the the difficulties of, say, like the increasing strength of the U.S. dollar, because as currencies continue to fluctuate and the dollar gets stronger and stronger, even the $800,000 level is still a little bit higher than that. When you take those factors into account. That being said, there has been a really excellent amount of demand, and that's partially because people were waiting for a while for the program to come back into play. Period. But I think that there's also a lot of people that were waiting to get a little bit more certainty. Like there was people that probably could have done a 500,000. Well, we had people specifically that could have done a $500,000 investment before June 2021. And they said, you know what, like, I want to see how all this plays out. Like, I want the certainty, right? And that's why, whenever I talk about the RIA, I can't say anything more than it's just fantastic for the client experience, full stop.
Agreed.
Right? I mean, there's so many protections that have come in. There's so much more that's incumbent upon the regional centers. There's so many more just benefits that are available for the individual client themselves. So from a global perspective, we're still seeing an exceptional amount of interest, and part of that has also been created by some of the different the different components of the new legislation. I mean,
like what?
Specifically the set asides, right? The fact that the visa set aside there in play, I'm sure we'll talk about that quite a bit more. That has definitely opened up markets that have been quiet. I mean, the ability to now move forward in a reasonable manner has reopened, say, China, or other country codes, really, brought that back into the the realm of possibility for people. And what's also kind of opened up some different avenues is the ability to concurrently file. Right. So CanAm, this is an increase. So I run CanAm Investor Services. So we are the affiliated broker dealer owned by CanAm Enterprises. So we've always run our investments, especially US based, through our broker dealer. So now, like, you might say, well, who would be US based? Who would be doing that? Well, plenty of people, right? There's plenty of people even in the pre-RIA who would be, here on their H-1B, they'd be here on their F-1, they would, be interested in EB-5, and they would be able to invest through us, and we can offer that to them. We can offer this security to them through our US registered broker dealer. But now that there is the ability for investors to concurrently file, this now opens that up wide open, because for all these investors who might be looking at this, there is an even larger pool of potential investors right here in the United States, which, for us, the way we've structured our firm, we have a really great ability to service and compliantly work with due to our.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, we're talking about folks who are in their 12th year H-1Bs, right? I mean, preparing their adjustment of status cases. It's like they're here as J1s, or as F1, they got the waiver and they get their first H, and they're literally on their 2-digit H-1B extensions at this point, and with no end in sight in the traditional EB-2 category. So the EB-5 and concurrent filing under the RIA is a fantastic opening, as you put it so well, Pete.
I think it does also open doors for people from countries who are retrogressed as well. We don't think of that, but it's not really available to the huge swaths of, say, Chinese nationals, but there are investors here who are on something, and instead of looking at, well, EB-5 is not an option for me because it's a 16-year wait, but I can get myself an adjustment and I can kind of carry on. I can just keep going. So I mean, it really does in small, meaningful ways to individuals. It opens the path to an EB-5 again. So
let's talk a little bit about the set asides, and I want to kind of hear from you, Christine, on this, because I think your very long-term perspective on EB-5, given how long you've been in this space, would yield some interesting insights. And I'm going to just ask an open-ended question. What do you think about the set asides? What are we missing? Go ahead, bring it on.
I think that in concept, as a way to address retrogression, it's a great concept. I think that there are, and then also to a lot of Grassley's concerns about EB-5 capital being directed into areas that are not just urban areas. It's a great concept. What I worry about is that we have spent the past 7 years trying to get the EB-5 program reform in place that it kind of, as Pete said, make all the corrections that we all knew needed to be in place, and we just couldn't come to a consensus about. And so it happened in one big shot,
Right.
as opposed to over the years, which have been a little bit less painful. And I worry that because USCIS is going to be a little bit slow in adjudications, I don't see that time speeding up. I don't see a lot of clarity about rural deals and infrastructure deals coming out in the near term. I worry about the same abuses that trickled into the regular EB-5 program coming out very quickly in the set-aside categories. You know, we are at a, you know, I think there was some hard-won you know, consensus among EB-5 operators and stakeholders over the past year. I think it hasn't always been the case. I think that there was, you know, we galvanized and came together. That was great. I worry that something like this without real clear guidance is going to cause us to kind of, you know, pull apart again.
Wow. So you, in what you've said, you're kind of putting the responsibility on the service to give us guidance on how we should operate.
I think that EB-5 operators, you know, we all come at it from different angles, but, you know, our job is to do what we can with the program that we have. And people will approach that differently. And you know, that's the way they're going to go about it. I think that the only one who can tell us, you know, that we're doing it wrong is USCIS. I understand, especially after, you know, in May, they don't want to come out with any more proclamations and have it blow up on them. But at the same time, you know, there's a lot of activity going on. It's really heartening. It's great to see, but I do worry that some of it's going too fast. And a lot of investors are going to get caught up in the same, you know, misconceptions and honestly lies that a lot of people got into 2018, 2019 about retrogression and everything else. You know, we have had to deal with our fair share of investors who weren't being talked to transparently back then. You know, whether it's by migration agents or immigration attorneys who tried to downplay retrogression, you know, these people made decisions, you know, and you can't get back the past 5 years. And I think especially with adjudication times being as long as they are, that it's even worse than it was back then. So I do worry about that. I don't want the program to suffer another setback reputationally because of what should be a really good thing.
A literal 2.0, next best thing, next best face of it. Okay, so I mean, the service, yes, we need a lot of guidance and input from the service, and you know, there is a way. Rather than going about it unilaterally and potentially being sued for erroneous legal interpretation, you can engage with us in a more substantive way. I have faith that will happen. Well, what can we do while we wait for that? Do you guys have, either of you or both of you have thoughts on best practices? What can we do to preserve this hard-earned win, this new program improved?
Well, I mean, from a client onboarding standpoint, I think that the program demands quite a bit of transparency, and I think that's what we are delivering, right? And I think that.
And what by that? What you know, transparency is one of those words. Tell me, what do you mean by it specifically?
Right. Well, I mean, look, the investor always goes in, and you know, again, so working with someone through the broker dealer, we know we're at least presenting this to them. We have to do a suitability assessment of them before they go into it. So they kind of they know they're giving a lot of information going into this. It's not just I'm writing a check and then, you know, call me when I can come to the United States.
So it's both sides. You're demanding transparency from the investor.
We're demanding. So we've always had that in terms of people coming on board with us. Now, on the flip side of it, I mean, there's always been, you know, the full transparency of going through the offering document and going through all that, but the fee disclosures and all of the different disclosures that go into it. Let me take a step back. All the disclosures are in the offering document, but now, you know, with the new legislation, the investor has the right to know all the people who they are working with on this transaction, and that seems that seems like almost obvious. Well, of course I knew I was working, but the reality is that some people are going through and not necessarily understanding what fees were being paid, not necessarily understanding who was being paid them. I'm sure there are plenty of markets where people you would not have expected to, but they were getting some sort of referral fee, and it's not necessarily jagged, but like there was things that was going into this that they may not have been aware of. That's now all baked into what they need to be acknowledging when they come onto it, and I think it's a great thing. I think these sorts of things, when we talk about the level of transparency for the clients coming in, as well as the compliance and maintenance that's incumbent upon us as regional centers, it's all for the improvement of the client experience. And to be honest, like you ask about kind of like the market demand, like the other great outcome of this is that the people that the other regional centers that I hear coming up against us like on a consistent basis are reputable, good, established regional centers. And that's, again, a good thing. Like the fact that like, if it now means that there is a smaller pool of regional centers now, kind of discussing and presenting to this smaller pool of investors due to the investment level or due to all those factors. Again, this is all like it's bringing the better participants, into the market, and that benefits everyone. It makes the regional centers have to structure better deals, to be able to compete and to be able to, best, facilitate their clients' needs. And it makes the clients, have to, do a further amount of due diligence to pick the one that they're going to want to work with. So,
yeah. I think that there have been a number of operators in this long enough where operating by best practices it's just easier. It just makes more sense. And if the theme of the RIA is transparency and accountability, I agree it's on both sides. Just as we should be able to ask service providers and investors to tell us what's really going on in your application, where are your source funds really from, how is that being transferred, because USCIS is scrutinizing this, because we can't afford to jeopardize a deal that we're raising capital for. We can't afford to make representations to a developer who's counting on that capital. They should be able to ask us the same questions. Back in the day where the hardest question was, how did you come up with the job creation calculations? If the regional center can't answer your questions, then you should be wondering. That is the theme of the RIA. They should be able to answer and ask all the questions they need to know, because USCIS is asking those questions. Why shouldn't they get those answers? I think the appearance of, just as Pete said, I'm an immigrant, I don't speak the language, I'm just buying a green card. I think that just really, for so many years, has not been the case, and we should just erase that from anything related to the program. And that just has to do with how we operate it on a day-to-day basis.
And how about your interactions with the developers, with your borrowers? What's changed there? I mean, there are new requirements relating to everybody in the ecosystem, in the deal. So has anything changed?
Not dramatically. I mean, to us, especially since 2019, at the end of 2019, when the program changed, at least temporarily, the size of the deals really changed. The TA was in question at the time. So that was even a tighter period than it is now. People have gotten more used to the investment amount. We've gotten a little bit better trying to figure out the TEA definitions and all the other requirements imposed upon the job creating entity related to the EB-5 raise. Those discussions have gotten a lot easier. Honestly, it's a real testimony to how impactful EB-5 has been on the economy, that so many developers, so many investment groups know what EB-5 is. They come in with a certain baseline of knowledge, and they were all interested during the program labs. We just didn't have the certainty that we could give them. So the fact that they can come back and we have more answers, I think they're all very interested. They also, I think, are assured, especially a lot of the big developers who have, businesses in lots of areas, they want to know, is this regional center has a good reputation? Are they going to stick around? Are they someone that's going to disappear in the middle of the night? And I'm going to be caught up with a whole bunch of foreign investors angry at me.
Right.
These are always their concerns because this is not their business. EB-5 is not their business.
And the headline risk.
Yes.
And I think that was a question in the minds of folks. What is the perspective of the developer community post RIA? Are they excited about it? Are they concerned? Are they being a little wait and see? What are you seeing? Are they kind of jumping in?
Yeah, I think that I think it's been really interesting. I think with the credit market being what it is, it's getting more expensive. So it's, as Pete said, it's definitely a time where businesses are looking at EB-5 as a way of filling some capital gaps in their pools. It gives us a lot of opportunity to scrutinize a lot of deals. We've talked a lot of deals, they're interesting, but we have a lot of options to look at. EB-5 is definitely been around long enough, established long enough, and with the sunset date being so long, and you have the grandfathering in place, so there's not this worry about some kind of clawback down the road. I think it's provided a lot of certainty for developers and other users of EB-5 capital. I think that the transparency and all that, I mean, all these businesses are used to this kind of accountability. Anyone who's registered with the SEC is used to reporting everything. So this gives them a lot of comfort that we are now operating in that space. So.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. What next? What do you want to ask me? While I cogitate on my next question for you, what are you curious about? Not just, I mean that a little bit facetiously. What are your questions, and to whom would you direct those questions?
Okay. Well, if I could say to whom could we direct our questions, I think a lot of that would probably circle back around to our talks about USCIS.
Yeah.
Because they have, to their credit, they have scheduled listening sessions. They are definitely efforting to interact more. But the reality is they're not really interacting in those spots. They are kind of like talking out loud. And I think, and again, this is probably just wishful thinking. I really wish, and if you want to be that little birdie to whisper in their ear, Carolyn, I would happily second it. But they could use some guidance on just how they communicate. So if I was going to talk to sometime, I would say, like, you could really use, and I'm not saying just say like form a committee, talk to the ALA EB-5 committee, or include IIUSA, something, so they can just talk. So when they're going through and they're interpreting some of these things, not to try to just dictate what the policy is, but just so they are kind of aware of some of the real the real ramifications of some of the things that they might just talk about. Like clearly, like not trying to I'm sure that they could walk it back, they probably would have, but their interpretation of how regional centers should be redesignated clearly was incorrect, and it took a whole ton of time and a whole ton of effort and funds and to have that reconsidered. It's one of those things that it feels like if they had a little bit more insight up to what their actual action was going to cause, it would make a real difference. And I mean, the last listening session was a prime example of that. Like there's the, I don't know how technical we want to get, but there's the discussion of the sustaining period. Yeah. And they kind of threw out there in a very just kind of like, flippant type of manner, like, oh, and this is that, and not realizing like, whoa, this is going to severely alter how like many people do business. And the pathway for a lot of clients who are coming into this. This is a real, and clearly they didn't really recognize, because I think you asked I think you were one of the first amongst many to kind of ask for clarification on that point that wasn't really there to be had, because I think that they realized, oh, we stepped into something that we didn't necessarily realize.
Yeah. And
again, like trying not trying to be like, accusatory, but like it's something that like they could really use a little bit of like a cause, like this is the way we see this. How would this play out if this, because we want to be doing right by people, we want to do it correctly, but if we do it this way, is there something that we're missing? And it's like, oh, this is something that you would be missing.
Right.
If you go ahead with
Right,
that.
both practically and also from a technical point. Is there a different interpretation that's better? What are some of the I mean, sustainment is a big one. What would you ask? What are some of the questions? But yes, you handsome gentleman.
I have many. Like say, how is the study, the fee study going to try to alleviate
Great
processing?
one.
What's the outcome of that? What do we mean by priority processing? Faster. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, but like, what does that even mean, right? I think that there's so many of them are focused on how people can get a better understanding of how they can move forward, because we now have like some decent clarity on how we have clarity on how we move forward. That part we know. We have clarity on how long the program is in place, and we have clarity that your investment will be in good standing. There's some clarity, I guess, on the nature of like the set-asides. There's still not any real clarity on how long it's going to take. And that's a big thing.
I want to come back, Christine, in case you have some burning questions that you would love answers to from anybody. But just on the processing times, I want to ask about it from your perspective as regional center operators, as investor relations. So what is it from your standpoint? I mean, and what I mean by that is, I mean, it's a longer loan. So is there a part of it that's helpful to developers? If, in the era of backlogs and lengthy I-526 processing times, I would love some insight on, what are some pieces of operating a regional center? What are the levers? What are the areas that might benefit from longer processing times overall? And where are you feeling the pressures? Is it like from investors where like, I can't invest in a program when I don't know when it's going to, where the endpoint is? What are you dealing with? What is your perspective on EB-5 processing time, start to finish?
I think that, to Pete's point, they're between the 956F or the legacy exemplar, there's enough clarity now for investors to be able to move forward. There's not a lot of options for any investor who needs to move forward quickly. That's really challenging. It's great for an investor who's thinking ahead. I'm not ready to move yet, but maybe in about 4 or 5 years, that's great. But that's long-term planning.
Right.
I think that it doesn't affect our borrowers and developers too much. We have not, as an operator, we have not necessarily used that to make terms even longer. We have gotten to include like maybe 1-year extensions, but I have to tell you, most of our borrowers, none of our borrowers so far have actually acted upon any of them. So ours, for the most part, stayed 5 years or even less. Sometimes they pay early.
Okay.
Good problem to have. But, sometimes we do get questions. Well, what about a 7 + 1 + 1? And we're like, that's 9 years. It's really hard to come up with a project where we feel good tying up someone's money that long when we don't know if that's actually going to be how long it takes to wait. You're assuming that the current processing times in place now are going to be what they are forever. And that doesn't feel good, I have to say. We'd rather give them kind of a normal time horizon, our investors, and then figure out what to do with their money on a short-term basis.
Gotcha.
We feel a little bit better about that, rather than tying it up. Even if the best solution is eventually just extend the loan. Sometimes that is the case. The project's stabilized, everything's built. They're like, well, cash is flowing, let's just leave it there. But that should be a decision made at the time. as opposed
Okay.
to in advance. I think a lot of those kinds of decisions were made with redeployment, and
Yeah.
those didn't feel kosher to us either. I think what provides a big problem with the long adjudication times is in the event an investor fails. I mean, at this point, adjudication times are so long, it's almost the end of that 5-year EB-5 investment term anyway.
Right.
But, if an investor's petition gets denied, after 3 years, after the project started, the ability to get refunded because, that there's no more job creation. There's no more, you just have to wait for that clock to run out. And, that was not what it always was. It used to be, that an investor had an issue, it was early enough, we could replace them, take them out, and everything else. And that flexibility is a little bit gone.
Right.
Sometimes.
Pete, you might encounter that. I mean, with questions coming in on the front end. What are you having to deal with that?
Yeah. And that's why, I point to, I hope that we start to get more and more clarity on what some of these initiatives to improve this are, because there's a lot of people that are investing, and they're moving forward because they do believe in, they got newfound faith in the program from it being reinstated. But there is still a faith that they're coming into when they say, okay, well, it's incumbent upon USCIS to improve their procedures to be more efficient and to process quicker. I mean, we all see what the RIA calls for in terms of adjudication times. Whenever we talk to clients, we caution that's just not. That's
to me, that's the hardest thing. One of the hardest things is obviously they need to plan. Obviously, they need to have even a range of, this is how long it's going to take. And the inability, like the feeling that I've got to be really lawyerly about, I can't give them what they need really to make this incredibly important decision. Really, that bothers me. I really wish I can give them, even in a range, something more precise.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, whenever I have that conversation, it's always, I don't really know. I know what processing times were before the pandemic, before the program lapsed, because we had, judging just from our sample size and what people were seeing. And then during the pandemic and during that time, these all just grew exponentially to a point that that's not even really, feasible, right? And so now, post RIA, what I typically discuss is my initial hope is that we get back to that pre-pandemic level of processing, with the hope that we can,
which was a couple of years. We're not talking
a couple of years, which is a couple of years, but compared to what USCIS quotes on their website, which is 50 months for an I-526. That's just unfathomable. So the hope is that we get back to that, couple of years, and then with increased improvements to get down closer to the targeted processing dates. But even that, it's hard to imagine.
My hope is that, and the State Department I think is trying. They're trying to post more precise processing times on the travel.gov website. I hope that the agencies are listening, and we get it. It's really, really hard. There's a huge backlog, lots of cases. It's incredibly demanding, but just some reasonable sense of, reasonable timeframes would be so helpful. And then obviously sticking to them. And then, we all know not every case is going to fall in that range.
That's fine. I have to admit, I find it disheartening that the only way to reliably get action is through suing the USCIS.
I hate that. I really do.
I'm relieved there is an option for people in really dire situations, but it's just more anxiety. It's another round. Understandably, our investors don't want to antagonize USCIS. Asking them to sue them to get their petition adjudicated is just, it's a difficult thing to ask of them.
Well, it's also more uncertainty. I think that's the part that bothers me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know everyone kind of throws that around. Everyone's sued. I'm like, we don't like to treat
We
that.
will if we have to,
Yeah.
but only if we have to.
It's not fun. It is really stressful.
Yeah.
You've been involved with some of the litigation that we had early on, trying to sort out the practicalities of the program back then. But it's tense. No one wants to operate that way. First you file your petition and then you sue them is not a good, process.
Not ideal, not ideal. Wow. Well, we'll take some questions if there are any from the folks. May I reserve the possibility of taking some questions afterwards from our registered guests and forwarding them on as well?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That would be great. Christine and Pete, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I have had CanAm, I think 3 times on my webcast. So you hold the record in terms of the guest who's appeared the most. And that somehow feels right.
Well, it's an enormous pleasure to always talk to you. Number one, you are on our speed dial, as you know, unfortunately. But
Fortunately, and
we have been through so much together over the years. When we could actually sit and talk about what the EB-5 program was like then, what we had hoped for, where we are now. It's actually it's really wonderful to see that some of the things that were on our wish list 7 years ago have actually come to fruition in the RIA.
How many conversations have we had?
Way too many. Some of them were a little depressing, but way too many.
We were holding drinks.
I know, but it's been really great to see some of those come together. I am, as Carolyn, you're always very optimistic about everybody who's in this program, and I think that's great because you cheer me up. For once, I agree with you. I am optimistic that the hard-won fight that we had with the RIA should carry over to some positivity in terms of how we deal with USCIS, how we engage with them. I do think there's largely a less confrontational attitude towards USCIS. There's an opportunity to build some bridges. I'm really optimistic that we can get some of Pete's answers, so he has better conversations with our investors, because we really want to be able to give them some better news than what we've been able to give in the past. So.
Yeah, I do too. Pete, any final words? I'm inspired. I'm gonna try even harder to get that dialogue.
Just in getting back out and getting back out to traveling and seeing clients again and doing that, it's the level of excitement is so palpable. So it really is. It's a really exciting time to be back in, and I feel like it's one of those things where it's kind of like we went through those tough times. We went through, we all kind of went through this crazy time of trying to represent people and work with people on a global immigration product in the midst of a pandemic, and how difficult that was for all of us, and then the difficulty of trying to weed our way through the lapse in the program and the uncertainty and all of the angst that our clients were feeling, your clients were feeling. So it feels good to be coming out the other side. I think that the RIA is good. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the implementation, because I think that the bones are good, but now putting it into place, preferably in a little bit more of a timely manner, is critical. But it's an exciting time, and I know I for one am very excited to be in the middle of it.
I feel privileged, and really to be your friends.
We appreciate all your guidance.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, love you guys. I don't know if that's appropriate to say, but it's true.
Let's just share all the love. It's awesome.
There's a question. All right, we'll take one question. Now, how would you describe the posture of USCIS these days? In the past, it was the culture of no. Now, how would you describe it? Defiant, confused? Okay, so this is our bonus question because we've had our hugs. Take it away. It's a great question, actually.
I think that there's a lot of pressure on USCIS to implement this program well.
Yeah.
It's been the RIA was also a hard one fight for Congress as well.
True.
And they really want USCIS to do this, to have this program, the reforms in this program be meaningful. So I don't think they're being flippant. I don't think they're being punitive. It has certainly felt that way in the past. We have certainly been through administrations where it felt like they were being punitive towards EB-5 investors in particular. And that was terrible. I do think that the overarching attitude is, how do we do this so this is a success? The devil's in the details and how that gets interpreted. And to Pete's point, we are all very hopeful that there's an increasing effort for dialogue. It has to be, a manageable dialogue. It can't be everyone screaming in the room, but we are hopeful. And that does seem to be the posture of USCIS. So I'll take that as an improvement over the previous 4 years, really. And I think that, us going back to our congressional leaders, advocating for that at the small level and having it perk up that way is going to be meaningful. We won the big battle. We got the reforms we want. We have to just keep on them. And it's not just us calling it, obviously, that's not going to work. It's about calling our congressional leaders and saying, like, look, you fought the fight, you voted for this. Make sure your legacy, in some way gets carried out, properly. So
Yeah.
I do think that is being felt by USCIS, and I think that's positive.
Pete?
Yeah, well said. I'd say culture of no, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say that USCIS is being very careful and very measured. I think that they try to come running out and I guess the best way to say is when the program first got reinstated, I think that the industry participants were kind of thinking like, great, there's 60 days for the program to be coming in. That's 60 days to have all of these things ironed out so that we can just be there on May 15th and be offering and being able to conduct business. Whereas like the initial USCIS clearly is working on a much different timeline. And I think that their experience now in how they misinterpreted a very important part of the program is definitely going to weigh in. They approach certain things, and look, I think that they're very measured, right? They want to have listening sessions. They don't necessarily want to have back and forth interactions. That they want to now be rolling out policy on their own schedule, which doesn't necessarily jive with ours. So I think that we as an industry need to try our best to work through this and develop best practices while some of these things are still being figured out. But I definitely think that USCIS is open to work with the industry, but I think that they are going to be now increasingly careful because now they have already some examples of how they could be kind of pushed back on if they do something that runs afoul of what the legislation says.
Well, and for my part, I feel like my own attitude is really want to be helpful. This is a reset in the most positive and affirming way. For the first time, we are and we're called upon to be on the same side. We all want this program to succeed and for the vision to be realized. And it's really hard. It's very, very hard to understand what it means. And then there are new people, there's turnover. So, and there's expertise on the private sector side, and we can be helpful. And so it's an invitation to accept the help. And, I also feel like, I'll just say something personal, when I'm up at 3 a.m. and I'm, triple, quadruple, quintuple proofing. And, I think we do feel called upon to put in that even more of an effort to try to make this all work. And that energy is going out there, and I think it's going to help.
Yeah, I do too. I think USS in some way must see it. So
they do. I really believe that. I truly do. That to me is one of the most affirming things. I truly do believe that effort is rewarded and is appreciated. And on that note, let's close the show. Thank you so much, Christine, Pete. Thank you again. Have wonderful holidays.
You too.
Thank you so much. Have a great holiday too, if I don't see you before.
And best to everybody up there.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.